Truth Frequency Radio Network. KTFRN. Worldwide.
Welcome, Shadowland Voyagers. In the spirit of sovereignty and self-empowerment, we invite you to journey with us into the Shadowland. Let's rediscover, reclaim, and integrate the fragmented aspects of our individual and collectively held consciousness. Realize true freedom and restore authentic expression. Could it be the only way out is through the Shadowland?
Good evening, everyone. This is Shadowland Voyagers, and I am Sienna Leah. I'm here with Christina Grant. Good evening, Christina.
Good evening.
And Elizabeth Hansen. Are you there, Elizabeth?
Good evening, everyone.
Yes. And this is episode 18. And our deepest excitement and honor is going out. We have Teal Scott with us tonight. Teal was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the year of 1984. In the first years of her life, it became apparent that she had been born with extraordinary sensory abilities. Among these abilities she was born with are clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, the ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields, and the ability to communicate with thought forms. As she grew up, unlike many children born with extrasensory abilities, her gifts did not go away. Her parents, who were both wilderness rangers, later accepted a job in the National Forest of Utah, not knowing at the time about the intensely religious climate of the location. Word of her abilities got out very quickly, and were not only frowned upon but feared by many in the religious community. It was because of Teal's extrasensory abilities that she was inducted as a child into a local cult by a family acquaintance, where she was routinely ritually tortured and programmed for a period of 13 years. Wow. She managed to escape from the occult when she was 19 years old. Since then, Teal has become a spiritual catalyst, both accepting and utilizing her abilities to remind people of the united, energetic nature of this universe, and to teach people how to find bliss in the midst of even the most extreme circumstances. Good evening, Teal Scott.
Hello, I'm really glad to be here tonight.
We are so excited and honored to have you here. What an amazing journey you have been on. We're hoping that you will be willing to share a little bit about the childhood experiences that you had, because it is really extraordinary what you lived through and gives so much incredible understanding of the work that you're now teaching to the world and the power of it. Mm-hmm. Christina, did you want to start with the questions you had for her in this regard?
No, I'd just like to hear what she has to say in regards to her journey. And
I'm always confused about what exactly people want to hear about it, because the details are a bit extreme.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to necessarily dredge you into all of that, although you've done a magnificent job of transmuting that, and I'm not trying to sort of spew on. However, if you could share to some extent what you really experienced. I think it really allows people access into a broader understanding of you and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Okay.
The miracle of how you've gotten to where you are today. Yeah, so I would like to hear some details about your childhood. I don't know if that resonates for you, but I would like a, yeah.
I can do that. So basically, the man who ended up taking me when I was younger and developing this really covert relationship with me had multiple personalities, and so based on which personality you were dealing with, I encountered different things when I was a child. I was being prostituted out to men out of outdoor gas station bathrooms and sometimes motel rooms. And he was obsessed with the idea of mind control. In fact, he wrote a book about mind control. And I was, of course, the guinea pig for that particular passion of his. So I'd get hooked up to electrical currents and be exposed to a lot of different modalities of programming based on whatever he wanted to do or not do. So, for example, it wasn't beneficial when I was growing up for me to have any kind of ability to take care of myself. So I was heavily programmed against any kind of self-care things, like I couldn't order for myself when I went to restaurants. I was programmed against doing dishes, doing laundry, anything that would go along with self-care.
Wow.
It's a typical Pavlovian, or not Pavlovian, it's Pavlov's response, basically. Anytime you introduce the brain to any kind of stimulus which makes it feel as if it's in a flight or flight mode, you can get an instant reaction. So basically, one of the ways he'd program me is he'd hook me up to the electroshock stuff, and then he'd have me walk towards like a washing machine, and he'd push a button that caused the electrical current to go through my body, so that now even looking at a washing machine causes me to feel as if I'm getting electrical shocks. So that's part of it. His best friend was a mortician, so during his programming sessions, he liked to use bodies quite a bit. His friend was not the greatest of characters, so he could gain access to the bodies before they were cremated, and he would do a lot of really horrific stuff with me with that late at night. And like he'd take me into the mortician's office late at night, and when I was about, I'd say, 8 years old, he ended up sewing me into a body and leaving me there for about 12 hours. And then when I was at his house, he would keep me in the basement or in this hole that he had outside, which was a 3-foot by 4-foot hole. And he also, one of his personalities belonged to this cult, 2 cults actually. One of his personalities belonged to a satanic cult. Another one of his personalities belonged to a Christian cult. And so he would take me back and forth from one to the other based on which personality he was in. And I had to participate in really horrific ritual ceremonies.
Oh my goodness, Teal.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, this is why it's kind of like most people are not really prepared for the type of childhood I had, because it's not just sexual abuse. It's like really the most twisted, sick stuff you can imagine. I mean, when he would stick me down in that basement, I was explaining to somebody the other day that when I was down in that basement, I had no idea whether he was going to do me in or not. I would sit there for hours, sometimes hearing his footsteps in the house above, wondering whether today he was going to come down and cut my arms off with a knife or a chainsaw. I had no idea whether he was going to do it nicely or leave me alive or not. Or so my life was totally hung in his hands, and I did what most victims do when they're in that situation, which is bond to the perpetrator. I bonded to him intensely and developed a strange kind of love for him, which I think was the most difficult thing to get over in therapy, was to admit to myself that maybe, because there was always an excuse as to why he was doing the things he was doing. It was usually some kind of excuse like, it's for your own benefit. Like, when he'd do these games where he'd chase me through the woods, he'd be driving his car, and then he'd get really quiet, and then he'd start counting, and he'd pull over to the side of the road and keep counting, and that was my cue that I had to get out of the car and run and go hide. Because it was sort of an exciting thing for him to participate in this hunting game. And if I won, he'd basically do, like, after 2 hours of searching for me and he didn't find me, he'd whistle, and that was my cue to come back, and I would get rewarded by either like a Tootsie Roll or him teaching me something. But if I lost, he'd cut coup into my ribcage, meaning take a knife and cut lines in my ribcage. or else rape me, either one. So, where was I going with that? Yeah, for him, he got off on that, but his excuse for that was that I had to learn the art of survival if I was ever to escape the demons that were after me, which is basically what he was saying. So he was convincing me that it was for my own benefit that he was doing these things. So in therapy, I had to admit to myself that potentially that wasn't actually the case, that he loved me and was doing all of this stuff for my own benefit, but that he was actually a highly tortured person who simply got off sexually on watching people suffer, I guess.
Wow. I mean, I'm just thinking about my life and the difficulties, quote unquote, that I've gone through, and it just completely pales in comparison. And it's just such a testament to hear. I haven't heard this part of your story, so I'm really moved that you've gone from literally the depths that pretty much anyone, a human, could be, and where you are now. It's so amazing and inspiring.
That's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, is because I feel like when people look at my past, and I kind of had to make this decision. The decision was I'm either going to 100% commit to life and heal from this 100%, or else I'm going to kill myself, because there's no middle ground for me. I'm not okay with living a miserable life, which is how I was living before I really took the reins. So now I feel like this is part of why I am so passionate about doing what I'm doing, is that a lot of people can say, oh, well, yeah, well, of course it works that you create your own reality. Everything is in the mind if you've had that kind of life. But if you've had my kind of life, that's what they say, then you don't understand how hard it is. But I agree with you that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to look at somebody who's lived the kind of life like I have had and say that I don't understand how difficult it is for somebody to be in the mental space they're in. Because, yeah, I have only met one other person in my entire life that has had a worse life than I have. So.
Oh.
Yes, we have our excuses, don't we? And my spiritual teacher often said this black and white thing, that it is either black and white. But most of us have been in this cushy little reality of illusion, and we think there's some middle ground or some half measures, where in fact, even though I really believe we're all, to a greater or lesser extent, lesser in many cases, most cases, living the same programming, Teal. Yours is on steroids, and obviously you chose to have it so bigger than life that it's completely in our face, and you completely take us down to, I don't have any excuses left. This lady did this. All right, lay out the program, girl, because it's 100% for all of us, because we're all addicted to our abusers. The entire culture is this guy hiding behind robes and scholarly languaging, and we're finding this out as the whistleblowers come out, and we see who's the head of the Catholic Church and who's the head of our highest institutions, and who are our politicians. They're all this guy.
Yes.
I don't mean every person in the middle management area, but at the top, they're all this guy. And we're all making excuses for him, and we keep coming back for more. And I really would like to hear more about how you got addicted to, what did you say, where you were actually making this guy into something good. That total doublethink.
They call it Stockholm syndrome. Basically what it is that when your life is in somebody else's hands, then the only way to cope with it so that you're not living with a monster you can't get away from is to fall in love with your perpetrator. It happens all the time. They studied it extensively during the in the concentration camps in Germany. So it's quite common for the human psyche, basically. Anytime you feel like your survival is dependent on something, you develop a loving relationship with that thing rather than die as the result of it, which would happen if mentally we were to make an enemy of that thing and not be able to get away. That's the thing we can't.
That is such important information for each and every one of us to understand, because we are all complicit with our perpetrators. We make excuses for them. We cover it up. We normalize the abuse. The entire format of this prison planet is abuse, and the normalization of making it okay, making it like it's not happening. And waking up from this is very challenging. People fight tooth and nail to hold on to their abusers. I'm noticing this where I'm living at the moment. It's very maddening. So how did you finally, I don't know if we want to even get to the finally. Is there anything more you want to share? You're just feeling guided to share about the content of what you lived through in those 13 years?
Well, even though it was a nightmare, the real blessing of getting to that point was, so as I was saying to somebody the other day, when I was down there, it took so many years and so many years of being in, stuck in basements and stuck in holes where I didn't know what my fate was going to be, or whether he was going to, end my life nicely or incredibly painfully, that by the end of it, my life got so bad that I just did not care anymore. I literally was like, just bring it. And at that point, I was absent of so much fear that I was willing. I mean, I did experience an intense kind of fear, so intense that I had nothing to lose anymore. And at that point, I started really thinking about how to change the situation in my own body. I was so sick of it that basically I said, all right, I don't really care what's true or not true, what's reality versus what's not reality. I'm going to go ahead and try this way of being because anything would be better than this. And that one decision, which happens on you when you're in the lowest of places, is what caused me to start doing the things which caused me to get away, ultimately. So I feel like there's a major blessing when you get to the level of life where you literally have nothing else to lose, where it's just that it throws you outside the box to such an extent that you're open to these new possibilities which you're too damn scared to look at otherwise.
Well, it's interesting you say that you didn't avoid the fear, but initially you dove into it. You went into mega fear and beyond. That
Yep.
you took it all on, that you accept. You talk about that in your work a lot, that the ultimate liberation comes in completely accepting what is.
Yes. Yeah, I teach non-resistance. So if we're in resistance to what we fear, or in resistance to something which is what fear is, then you're going to be suffering for the rest of your life, basically. I'm a real advocate of embracing the shadow aspect.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. How do you do that? Can you tell us more about how you do that? How you came to that? Whatever.
I came to embracing the shadow aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first I'll tell you basically how I ended up getting out of this situation, because that's the key to the whole rest of this.
Good.
So, I was sitting in this hole, which he put me in, which he called the mind space. I realize I'm laughing now. It was not funny at the time, but it's accurate now. The mind space. You're stuck down there for hours and hours naked. You have nothing else to keep you company. You're freezing cold most of the time, laying on a bed of stinging nettle. So I'm sitting in there, and I had nothing to do but to think. And when you're in that kind of a situation, your brain distracts you with all kinds of fears. That's all it's doing. It's racing through the possibilities, not of what's going on in the moment, but of what could basically be happening to you when he comes back, or if he ever comes back. If he doesn't, you're just going to die and starve to death in this hole. So there's where the mind goes. And after so many times of this, the mind can only distract itself with fear for so long. And I had come into this life with all this awareness as to how the universe works. And even that was not enough for me to focus on that instead of what was directly in front of my face, the fears. But after a while, I was bored enough, basically, down in this hole. He'd left me to stay down there for probably 4.5 hours. And I was so damn bored of thinking about things that I was afraid of that my mind sort of settled into the present moment. And I was completely convinced of my own loneliness. That's what I was doing. I was just like, I'm by myself, and there's nobody else in this reality that is even remotely close to me or capable of understanding me. And suddenly my attention focused in on this little ant, because down there, that's kind of the only company that you have, are these little bugs that are around, roly-poly bugs and stuff. But there was this ant that was crawling around on the edge of this hole. And I was watching him just sort of take the path of least resistance around roots and pick at things that he wanted to eat. And I was realizing that even though my reality, I'm sitting here in the space with this ant, and my reality is just one of total misery, and his reality is totally separate from me. And I'm thinking, okay, he's just taking the path of least resistance. He's not freaking out about me. Like when I put my finger close to him, he's not really freaking out about my finger. He just walks in the opposite direction. So there was me thinking about the path of least resistance. And then I was thinking about how it was sort of this awareness that dawned on me immediately. They call it an awakening, basically, in the spiritual field, where I realized that this entire time I had been convincing myself that I was completely by myself. I was surrounded by life forms. So I really did have company, because I had this ant down there in the hole with me and all these other bugs that were there. And then I started thinking about the roots having consciousness and the grass blades having consciousness. And suddenly I was bowled over by the fact that it is impossible to be alone no matter where you are. And it was an amazing epiphany. And then in that moment, I stopped and realized that emotionally, for a period of about 2 minutes, I felt awesome. But I didn't feel awesome because my situation changed, right? I wasn't pulled out of the hole. Nobody said, oh, by the way, this is heaven. It's all over now. I was still stuck in that hole, still in the same basic situation, but I had felt good for 2 minutes based on the orientation of my focus, which fit perfectly with what I knew about this universe, which is that mind creates reality, and that any kind of resistance you have is going to make something persist. So I decided at that point to start listening to all these entities which had been around me since the very beginning, and to start being very deliberate about my focus. Because even though I could be raped, if I was in the middle of a rape, I could still dictate what I was focused on. I could focus on the fact that my ribs felt like they were breaking because this man was on top of me, or I could focus on how I liked the pattern in the carpet he was raping me on top of. So I started really practicing the art of deliberate focus. And I started, because of that, because I was spending less time focusing on the negative things in my reality, I started being a match to more positive and more positive aspects, to the point where soon I ended up getting an idea of what it might feel like to be free, i.e. not in the situation I was in. And the more I started focusing on that, so a lot of times when we'd be in the middle of really horrific things that he would be doing, I would be sort of daydreaming about my perfect ideal life, which granted was nothing compared to what I'm living right now, but it was still something for me back then. And because of that obsessive focus that I started practicing as a game, see, I made it a game first, because I'm like, I'm going to die this way, so let's just make it a game. So if I can make it a game, at least I have some kind of control. So I made it a game, and that was really ultimately what led to me being a match to the manifestation of this mistake he made, which made me capable of getting away. So it's like one thing led to the next, and it took me about 2 years of this deliberate focus, but 2 years is nothing compared to 13 years. So 2 years of deliberate focus, and I was a match to getting away based on just changing the orientation of my focus.
Woo! Wow.
Well,
that is such a wake-up call. Yeah.
It shows the power of of our consciousness, and how you changing your inner world, the universe then matches that. And yes. It took a while for the universe to conspire for your freedom, but internally you found a place where you were free. And that's just so inspiring, and anyone can take this story and see it as even just a metaphor for our own life. I mean, being in whatever is difficult and feeling completely trapped, and just changing our focus, and in that deep point of reckoning, that's when you really start to see, and you really start to become awakened and aware.
Totally perfect. Can I add something?
Yes.
Yes.
So earlier in the reply that you just stated, you said it took the universe a while to do what it did, which is manifest what I was thinking about. And it's not that case at all, which is really important for people listening to this to understand. It's not that the universe took any time reflecting what it is that I was thinking about. It's that I took a long time, not compared to some people, but compared to how I would like it, I took a long time to pull my focus away from the most dominant way that I had been focusing for years and years. The best part about this universe is that it is so incredibly benevolent that it will just reflect exactly what you think. And so what took a while was me training my thoughts. The minute I thought one thought that was different, the universe reflected it exactly and immediately, because that's not difficult for the universe to do.
Awesome.
Can you tell us you said it took 2 years for me to figure out how to get away. How did you get away?
Well, see, and this is the thing. The lovely part about this is that people make it very difficult when they think about the physical hows. That only puts you out of power, because honestly, there was no way for me to get away in terms of how. there from where I was. So what I did was focus purely on what it would feel like for me to be free, to literally be able to dictate what I did with my own life, to be able to order, food from the grocery store, be able to pay at a counter, any kind of freedom. So I focused on that enough that things started to manifest in my reality. So the first thing that manifested in my reality was my mother taking me on this trip to go meet these twins that were in a neighboring city. She wanted me to have some friends, which I never had. So she brought me over there to meet them. And they had a mutual friend who is Blake Dyer. Many of you may have known him. He's now my emissary. So Blake Dyer was this friend of the friends that I went to go see. And I met him twice and instantly hit it off with him. So based on being with this Blake, I started dreaming about what it would be like to be with a man that was separate from my perpetrator, and what it would be like to be adored. Like maybe I wake up in the morning and this person makes me breakfast instead of sticks me in a hole. So I was thinking about those kinds of things, and instead of making myself miserable by thinking about the fact that I did not have that, I was daydreaming about what it would be like to have that. And every time I wasn't spending time in that mind space, I would spend time thinking about what I appreciated about now, the present moment. So like I said, if I liked the pattern on the carpet, I'd focus on that instead of the fact that somebody was raping me. Now, the orientation of that positive focus made it so that the positive manifestations had to occur. That's the law of this universe. If you are focusing positively, positive manifestations must show up in your reality, and so they started to. And after I ended up manifesting this lovely being, Blake, into my reality, I ended up being a match to my perpetrator making a mistake. So he had found out that I was planning on potentially leaving I was an escape, basically. I was planning on escaping. He ended up finding that out. I don't know how he did, but he found out. So he planned a very elaborate mental programming session where he injected me with ketamine like usual and threw me in the back of this car that he had, and then drove me up into the wilderness where his friend, who was the mortician, had procured a body that day, and it was a body of a suicide victim. Basically, you can tell that because this particular body had no bottom jaw, which usually means they've put a gun in their mouth. So this body was in the middle of the woods, and he was supposed to have given me enough ketamine that day that I was going to black out and not remember what I had done that day and not remember anything until I came to. But he didn't end up injecting me with enough. It is the first mistake, second to choosing me as his item of focus, which ultimately didn't work for him, obviously, because I'm free today. But second to that, the only mistake I ever remember him making was this one mistake where he gave me the wrong injection in terms of levels of ketamine. And so I ended up there, even though I was coming into full consciousness during the car ride. So I remembered where I was before that. I remembered him injecting me, and I remembered the car ride, which I was not supposed to remember. So we ended up in the middle of the wilderness, and he walked me through these trees back to where this body was laid out in the woods. And he immediately started, he grabbed me by the back of the neck and immediately started yelling at me about, look what you did. He threw me down so I was right next to this body and was like, look what you do if I'm not around. This is what you do. Trying to convince me that I had killed this person. But I was coherent enough, because he hadn't injected me with enough ketamine, that I could smell the formaldehyde off of this body, and I could tell that it had been dead for a really long time because all the blood had settled to the bottom of the body, making it look like the bottom was just one solid bruise, which is what happens when bodies sit around for a long time. So none of it was fitting with the reality which I had experienced. And I could not figure out why the hell he would tell me that I had done something that I hadn't done. I was going through all of the scenarios in his benefit as to why he would be doing that. And, he made me carve the body up with ritual symbols and made me actually have sex with this body, which was really a nightmare. But then, of course, we ended up putting the body in this pit and sitting out there in the wilderness while it burned for hours, because it takes really, really hot fire and a super long time to burn a human body. But it was just, we were sitting there by the fire, and my whole reality was collapsing around my feet, just because I could not fit what he was saying in with the rest of my reality. I could not figure out why he was lying to me. Why would he say that I did something I didn't do? And that one tiny thing caused a domino effect which didn't feel good. I'm not going to lie and say it was liberating. It was awful. It made my whole life a lie. And the problem with being in this kind of a situation as a victim, for lack of a better word, is that the way you cope with it is by adopting a storyline. And now that storyline no longer made sense. So my whole reality is crashing, and I was thinking, well, if he's lied to me about this, what else has he lied to me about? And if he's told me this, then maybe I have a choice about leaving or staying. So he was trying to convince me that basically if I didn't stay with him, then the cops were going to be after me because, thanks to him, we had to dispose of this body in a random way, and because of him, I'm not going to get caught, but look what you do when you're all left to your own devices kind of thing. So that, and I was still totally drugged up on ketamine. So what happens when they use these bodies, of course, is that he would put the ashes, he'd throw the big pieces of the body away and cover it over, but he'd take the ashes and then give that back to the person who's at the mortician's office, and then those were the ashes that would be given to the family. Of course, the family has no idea what's just happened to their loved one. But I got in my car super drugged out, which I don't even know how the car got there. I'm assuming he had another person drive it there, but by the time I got down to his house, my car was there, and he's like, all right, well, you better monitor yourself, And so I got back in my car, and I could not think of what to do. And the only place which felt safe to me was to drive 3 hours from his house to Blake's house, Blake, the one that I had just met. I'd only seen Blake about 2 or 3 times before that. We weren't intimate acquaintances at all. We were just acquaintances. And I showed up at his house because I knew where it was, and he wasn't there, and I basically broke in through the window. Yes, and that's so spiritual guidish of me. But yeah, I broke in the window, and nobody was at home, and so I completely broke down. And I didn't know what else to do with myself because I could not figure out what was going on with reality, and I was toying with going all the way back to Idaho where all of this was occurring, but I ended up staying there, and I grabbed his shaving razor and cut the crap out of my arms. And so by the time that Blake got home, I was bleeding all over the bathroom and completely breaking down. And I started telling him some of the stuff that was going on in my life, and of course he had this look of shock and horror, but his answer was, you're not going home. You're never going home. You're going to stay here. I'm hiding you for as long as it takes. And I never assumed at that point that I was going to get away. I was just like, well, maybe, I'll probably go back one day. But I just stayed there because it felt good to stay there. And he was taking care of me and feeding me and trying to teach me what was an appropriate way to interact with people and what wasn't appropriate way to interact with people. And I felt loved for the first time. So I just stayed. And then I stayed the next day. And then I stayed the next day. And I got away permanently.
Wow. So your work for 2 years on yourself shifted your frequency enough,
yes,
to create an attraction or a resonance with him, even though maybe it was a tiny fragment.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, being in a love field allowed the rest of it to come up back online, to grow within you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and then of course the story that most people like to hear is, oh, good, it's over, she's escaped, and I cannot even stress this enough. It was so far from over. I was a shell of a human being for the first 5 years after I got away. I did not know how to interact with people. I didn't know that it was inappropriate to have sex with every person that crossed my path. It was just, I had no context for which to exist in, I guess, basic society. So all of that was an education process for me. And I still actually have not done laundry to this day. So it's like anybody who thinks that I'm completely healed from this, I'm not. I still, even though I've been able to cook for myself and I can order at restaurants and things like that now, that's one of the things I haven't tackled yet. So so there's still some serious remnants there from my past, but it pushed me eventually into therapy. And I had, luckily this time, an incredible psychologist who specializes only in ritual abuse. Isn't that sad that it can be its own specialty? That made me really sick. But that's all she sees is women who have been, not only women, but mostly women who have been ritually tortured in cults and things like this. That's all she sees. So she was incredible. And with her help, on top of what I've been doing on my own, on top of the universal knowledge I came in with, I have managed to get myself to this point of healing, which is, I would say, miraculous, but miracle meaning not something which has been done to me, but miraculous in the fact that it's a quite beautiful thing to participate in and watch. And I would not take it back now, even if I could.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. It must be difficult even to talk about it still to some extent. Well, it's the extremity of the torture that you underwent is so severe. I would like to know, you said that there was, because the dosage of the ketamine was lower, you had, for the first perception, something's wrong. That you started to break out of normalization or the spell of the abuse and see that it was a lie.
Yes.
Can you share with us any other keys in your therapeutic process that were huge like this, that were the triggers to your liberation, and I imagine also the triggers for the further evolution of the incredible work that you're bringing to all of us now?
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them.
So many.
I think you want to know what's interesting is I feel like the most incredible revelation that I had in this whole process was that after I had been in therapy for, it was probably 4.5 years at that point, I realized that even though I had gained all this awareness, and by virtue of getting awareness, I was feeling better about my life, I was still not happy. I didn't have the vaguest clue about what that was. And it seemed like no matter what psychologist or what psychiatrist or what person I went to, and I'd be like, well, how do you be happy? That's what everyone wants to know, right? They would not have an answer for me. And I was kind of surprised because I'm like, well, what else is it that you're doing? You're in the business of trying to make people find happiness. So how can you not know how to do that? And I kept getting the same answer, which is, well, it's just what's important is that you come here and you keep rehashing what's gone on and you keep revisiting the shadow aspect, which is what I think is the most important first step. But they had no answer as to how to get happiness. And I started realizing that the women that I was seeing, because I was in a group setting after a while, because after you've been through ritual abuse psychology for about 2 years, they allow you to go into group therapy where you're with other women that have experienced the same thing. What was quite incredible was that I was actually in group therapy with a woman who had been in one of the cults that I was in. So that was amazing, full circle.
Wow.
But
yeah,
I was watching these women who had been in therapy. 2 of the women were twins, and they had been in therapy for over 20 years. And I did not see improvement. Not only that, I had already, in the process of 2 years, caught up to where they were and had been for 20 years. And I started looking around the room, realizing that we may be able to bring, these women who have escaped from abuse to a certain point, but nobody's getting any happier. And the message from the mainstream medical community is, well, I'm sorry to say, but abuse really changes the way your brain works, and so there are some physical limitations that we really have to just put up with, and for the rest of your life, these are the things you're going to struggle with. And I'm not a kind of personality type that's okay with that. I'm not okay with definites, especially not knowing what I know. I'm a medical intuitive, so I can even see the plasticity, physically see the plasticity in the brain. So when they kept giving me that answer, I think it's time for you to accept that there are some limitations to what you can and can't do. I was like, that doesn't work. So it's like, all right, I guess it's up to me. I get to go try out different things and apply the things that non-physical beings are telling me and apply the things I know about this universe and see if I can come up with a way to break myself free, not just of my own conditioning, not just free of programs, but to break myself free of this entire pattern of suffering entirely. I want to know what it is to find happiness. I want to know how to maintain it long term and how to teach it to people. So that was a major inspiration for me. And when it comes to breaking free, that was my number one realization, I think, that really caused what I'm doing now. I also had my son, of course, which is a serious one. When he came out, I don't know if I've talked much in the past about the different aura colors, but there's a new aura color which they call crystal, because New Age types like to come up with really corny names for everything. But the look of the crystal aura is like a prism. And when he was born and he had that aura color, I broke down. My husband actually had to hold me for like an hour. I was crying because I thought I was gonna end up. I was hoping to end up with a really dumb jock, which it's not really. We can't say that one thing's dumb or more dumb, but usually what they call the physical colors, you're more jock mentality type people. They've got the physical colors, so yellow and red and oranges are all the physical colors. And I had sort of been hoping for a kid with those types of aura colors so they would never have to experience anything that I experienced as a result of my extrasensory stuff. So when he was born a crystal, which is even a step further than the indigo aura, which I have, I cried and cried knowing that he'd basically have my same abilities. And I stopped myself for a moment and thought, this is not okay. If I am going to raise a kid who has extrasensory abilities, I have got to learn how to embrace my own, because I can't teach him to have a good attitude that's non-resistant towards them if I'm resistant towards them. And so my son's birth really catapulted me towards revisiting all of these extrasensory abilities, which are so overwhelming in my life, and embracing them instead of trying to deny them with sports, which is what I was doing at the time.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow.
Can you talk about your extrasensory abilities a little bit? I understand you can see different dimensional realities and whatnot.
Oh yes, it's a very it's a very long list. So I understand now why it is that I came in this way, which is that there is actually a gene that people can activate or deactivate, which enables you to have access to all the other dimensions, not just the third dimension. So by virtue of switching off this particular gene, you participate fully in the physical dimension, and that's where your perception is, if that makes sense. And when I came in, I switched that off, or switched it on, basically, rather. So when I came in, I had all of these extrasensory abilities. So instead of coming in as an empath where I'm just feeling people, or as a medical intuitive where I'm just seeing medical things, or as a medium where I'm just talking to beings, I was doing all of it, which was a nightmare. Wow. It was an absolute nightmare growing up when I didn't know what to do with the energy that I was perceiving. But, oh man, there's a long list of things that I can do, basically, where... So, like, for example, I have the empathic abilities, which is the ability to tap into somebody's thought patterns enough that your own body is registering the emotion which they are feeling. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, I had that happen one time. It was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Keep going, though.
I can talk with thought forms, which is basically acting as a medium. When I have a high fever or have let my guard down enough, I end up channeling, which is different than medium work. It's where a being's actually utilizing your physical body. I am a medical intuitive, meaning that I can see through skin. Because to me, see, I don't perceive negative space. It's like when I was talking to somebody about how they perceive something, they'd say that they can see nothing but clear in between one object and another object. That is not what the world looks like to me at all. I don't see a point at which one thing doesn't blend into the other thing. So we just look like these mix of energy fields that are more dense the closer you get to the physical reality. So people get more dense the closer you get to the level of the skin, and then more dense all the way down to the bone. And then once you hit the bone, it gets less dense and less dense straight into the marrow of a person's bones. Oh. So I'm seeing all of that, and obviously seeing these energy fields makes it super easy to manipulate them, because I have an incredibly high frequency. I can manipulate the way that people's energy fields work, and so when you do that, you can change the blueprint of physical reality. So I do a lot of healing work that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get to the solution aspect. Clearly, you went through a horrific, super extreme journey of torture, and took everything that science and psychology, psychiatry had to give you, which was obviously something, but not nearly adequate enough to explain how to really reboot your reality. You talk about them not understanding how to even live a life in human happiness. So you're creating a new paradigm by accessing the authentic nature of the alchemy of how we create our destiny path here on the planet that is uniquely your own, out of the bowels of hell and beyond. And so I would like to spend the remainder of our time together exploring what you discovered. And can we start with focus and desire?
Yeah, okay. So here's the thing. Coming into this planet by virtue of being extrasensory, I had access to all this knowledge about how the universe itself works. But even given all of that, being down here in the physical dimension, the realness of the physical reality tends to captivate your attention. And it's impressive how quickly human beings adopt thought patterns. What I mean is, if a baby coming into this reality, all it takes for them is to spend time in the presence of their parents and the way their parents are thinking for them to adopt those same beliefs. And the second that they adopt that same belief, even for a minute, their reality, the baby's reality, starts to reflect that back to them. And then they look at that I guess you could call proof, which is just a physical manifestation, and it reinforces the belief. And now you've got yourself on this belief spiral, which we call a snowball. Right. So I already, coming in, knew about the way that whole thing works. It was just I was too petrified to really try it out for myself. But the truth of this universe remains the same, that if you focus on something, it must show up in your reality. It takes 68 seconds. I don't understand why that is the time yet. I haven't asked a lot of questions about why that time, but it takes 68 seconds for a person to manifest something physically based on a thought pattern. And it only takes 17, basically between 16 and 17 seconds, based on which person you're talking to, for them to attract thoughts which vibrate at the same frequency. So you see, if it takes that little amount of time, that's just slightly over a minute, to attract something based on your focus in your physical reality, then it's pretty understandable why we get ourselves into these reality ruts, I call them, where we're giving so much focus over a period of time to one specific thought that it's all that can manifest. Literally, our reality cannot include any other possibility than what we have been focused on. And so knowing that, the universe, of course, would rather you focus positively because it feels good. But the real awesome portion of this process is that if you focus on something that feels good must pop up in your reality that matches that vibration. So you can, based on what you are paying attention to, that's a more easy way of understanding it than to use the word focus, because focus implies effort. But what you are placing your attention on is what's creating the reality that you're living in. So if you're paying attention to something which is causing you to feel positive emotion, that emotion is your indication that you are in the process of creating something which you are going to enjoy the manifestation of. But if you are in this moment focusing on something that causes you to feel negative emotion, the negative emotion is your indication that you are in the process of creating something you are not going to enjoy the manifestation of. So the process of being deliberate about creating your reality is the process of paying attention to your emotions enough that you are able to pay attention only to those things which feel good, and thus manifest only things which feel good.
Sounds so simple. I would like to hear, if you wish, how you moved from this incredible self-hatred, mutilating yourself, cutting yourself to bloody mess, bonding with the most horrific form of abuse, to a place of incredible self-love, incredible love for life, and particularly the journey to self-love. We talk about that a lot here. There's a lot of lip service to self-love. I think very few of us really understand the nuts and bolts, the step-by-step of how to get there from here.
Well, that's really great, because that's actually the book I just wrote. I'm waiting to get a publisher that will sign it right now, but the book I just wrote is How to Love Yourself. It's my most beloved subject, I guess, because of the fact that I went through that process. I realized basically that what was making my life miserable after X amount of time was the fact that I was still living with an enemy, even though I had gotten rid of my perpetrator. And this is no different for someone like me who grew up with an actual perpetrator than somebody that grew up with a basic parent that didn't love them in the way that they needed to be loved. The minute that I got away from that, it became apparent that even though he was physically gone from my reality, I had become him. And I was living in this dual kind of reality within one body where I had a perpetrator in me. And that was the side of me that was cutting to try to keep myself in line. That was the part of me that was berating myself constantly to try to keep myself successful. All of us have this kind of, I don't want to call it a separate person, but you could call it the ego. It's the internal moderator. It's the person that is convinced that brutality is the only way that is going to keep you in line and keep you lovable. That's the ironic part. The major awareness which I had relative to this is that the self-hating aspect of you does not have negative intentions. It doesn't want to kill you. It's not out to get you. It actually has a quite benevolent reason for being, and that is that the self-hating aspect of you thinks that in order to be loved, you must be good. And because we are raised in a society that believes that good means punishment, it thinks its only way of keeping you good and thus getting you love is to punish you. So it's this constant punisher that is trying and trying and trying and trying to get you love. So if you understand that, then you can switch it around and start giving yourself the kind of love that was never shown to you, trying to give yourself, permission to be who you are, trying to give yourself anything, basically, that your childhood self would want. And then you start feeling loved, you start realizing that punishment has nothing to do with it. But then you go through a pattern of being very frustrated at the people that raised you. I will warn you about that. But I think relative to self-love, my most important thing that I found out, because in the beginning I was so deep in self-hatred that even the thought of thinking something positive towards myself made me actually revolted is the word. It was like on the verge of vomiting sometimes when I'd even think about coming up with a positive thought relative to myself. My whole body would rebel against that. And I realized that I would have to basically find a way to go in the back door because affirmations weren't working. I was deep enough that it was like every time I said, and of course I have teachings about affirmations relative to this now because I understand why affirmations don't work for a lot of people. But, I'd say something because that's what basically the major self-help thing at the time was. If you say something like, I love you over and over again, then eventually you're going to believe it. But I couldn't even get past that. It was like, I'd say I love you 20 times, and by the end of it, I would feel 10 times worse because every time I said that, I'd be more aware of how much I didn't. And so I was like, this isn't working. I got to find some other way to go around the back door. So I ended up, being able to see energy fields makes it super easy to come up with certain techniques. For example, my technique of diffusing water with energy, because I can actually see when somebody is focusing attention into water, the actual water changes. The whole vibration of the water changes. It actually looks visually completely different to me. So I knew that if you focused intention into water, that the water would change its structure, the way it structurizes itself. So I would do that, and then I would think to myself, okay, so at least I know how to project love towards other people because my ego, my self-regulator, self-hating system has no problem with extending love, what it thinks is love, that is, out towards other people, just so I'm depleting my tank. But I am not allowed to give it to me. So I'd focus on loving something completely, like horses is what I used in the beginning, because that was my obsession. So I'd focus on how much I loved horses and all those positive emotions, and I'd focus on putting that energy into the water. And then I was like, okay, let's go in the back door. And in my book, I say I liken this to storming the castle. You know how if you try to get in the castle the front way, it doesn't work. You got to kind of find a way to go in through the dungeon and get at the castle from the inside. I take that water and I drink it. And it was like, because my ego, my self-hating aspects of me had no defense for that, because it was convinced the whole time I was focusing energy that it was okay because I'm focusing love outwards, not inwards. But the fact that I turned it back on myself immediately when it wasn't expecting and ingested that vibration, and my whole body would tense up completely as if I had just been shot, and immediately just the intensity. I don't know if most people understand this, but a positive vibration is 10 times stronger than any kind of a negative vibration, because a negative vibration is just a lack. It's not two opposing energy fields that are in and of themselves equal. So it's not like dark and light are opposing and equal forces. Darkness is just the absence of light. And so negative energy is the absence of positive energy. So positive energy is 10 times stronger. So a positive thought is 10 times stronger than a negative thought. So just the nature of that strong vibration of love that I had focused into the water being introduced to the negative vibration of my body was enough to overwhelm it completely. And so I would feel like puking, but I would intentionally hold the water in, and instead it would force my vibration up, meaning that all of the vibration I had in my body had to raise up to match the frequency of the water that I had just put in my body, because the law of the universe is the law of attraction, meaning the only vibrations which can share space are vibrations which match. So when you introduce vibrations that are so different as a self-hating one and a self-loving one, only one of two things can happen. That is, either they can't share the space, so you'd probably puke up the water, or else one of the vibrations has to raise to meet the higher frequency, or the one has to lower. But if you're introducing a dominant vibration, which is the positive thought, then much more likely that the lower vibration is going to come up to match the higher vibration. So by putting that in my body, I was forcing my own vibration to match the frequency of that water that I was putting into my body, and I would have extreme releases. I'd be there crying and crying and crying, to the point where I'd be curled up in a ball on the floor just bawling, because it caused such a release. Because as my body raised up to meet that frequency, all the frequencies which were unlike it had to release, which is what you see when you see someone crying.
Incredible. We need to take a short break here, Teal. I want to stick with this topic because we have a lot of people here at Shadowland Voyagers that have very deep situations that need this real, transparent, authentic, down-to-the-bone information that you are offering. You're not cutting anything. You're really telling it like it is. And I can just sense there's so many people who are ready to hear this and to be transformed by it. We'll be right back. We're here with Teal Scott. This is Shadowland Voyagers on Truth Frequency Radio Network.
Broadcasting worldwide in complete defiance of the U.S. Patriot Act and the NDAA.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Shadowland Voyagers. This is Sienna, and I'm here with Teal Scott. Teal, perhaps you could give us your website and ways people can access the vast amount of information that you have to offer. What is your website?
My website is www.thespiritualcatalyst.com. It's really easy just to go to Google and type in Teal Scott. My website is the first one that pops up under that search result. I'm also on Facebook, so people can find me that way as well.
And you have numbers of YouTube videos. You have a whole YouTube channel.
Yes, I do. My YouTube channel is the Spiritual Catalyst channel. I have a weekly video thing, basically. I don't know what else to call it. It's called Ask Teal. People submit questions, and I pick which one I'm going to answer, and then I do a video each Saturday on the topic that I selected.
They're fantastic, by the way. You have one book out and another one you're about to get published. What is the book that they can get right now?
The book that's available right now is called The Sculptor in the Sky, and it's a informative book about the universe. It answers the big questions in life, things like why are we here, what's the meaning of life, and how to find happiness. And the one that I am in the process of getting published is called How to Love Yourself. It is exactly as the title suggests. My frustration in life, even myself, was that everyone in our world says it's important to love yourself, but nobody really knows how to go about teaching somebody who doesn't love themselves to love themselves. So it's a bit like saying, go love yourself, which is like telling a 5-year-old to go do a complex college, physics problem. You don't know how to do it. So I wrote this book to help people to know the exact steps to take and to fill them in with information along the way so that they can get from wherever they are to a place of increased self-love.
Yeah, that was a beautiful book, I have to say, and it provides numerous tools and clear examples for integration, and particularly having to do with loving oneself, and which I found interesting. It's a guide to take personal responsibility, and yet that those words are never used in The Sculptor in the Sky, which I found fascinating. It's delivered. The message is delivered through the tools. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I specifically didn't use those words at any point because most of us, especially in the Western world, when we think about taking responsibility for our lives, it's it's associated with something our parents say to us when they want us to own something bad that we've done and blame ourselves.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I was trying to figure out, I finished the book and I'm like, she never used that word once, responsibility. And I found that really fascinating. But it's just, the whole book is that would be like the central focus, actually. So it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to get back to, there you are drinking the water of the loving your horse. You drink the water, it lifts your frequency. It's almost a ritual, this curse of self-hatred. You have massive self-hatred starts to break up in your body. And so where do you go from there? What are the steps of self-love?
Well, the steps are going to be different based on who a person is and where they are relative to self-love. Some of us are much more hardcore self-haters than others, which is quite obvious through our actions towards ourselves and the way that our physical reality is. Because if you hate yourself, your body starts breaking down and you start manifesting illness. So some of us who are serious self-haters may cut or develop serious addictions, but other serious self-haters, you won't see an overt addiction like cutting, but you will see their body break down and they'll develop things like MS or cancer. So based on how serious of a self-hater somebody is, certain techniques are more important to use than others. So like for somebody who really can't even utilize affirmations yet, they'd want to do that water project, which I just said. My other favorite one, which is in my book, it's a program I put everybody on. It's one of the first chapters, is the 365 days of self-love, where you're living your life according to one question, and that is, what would someone who loved themselves do? So you have to do that all day, every day, relative to everything. So no matter how large or small a decision you have to make. So let's say you get invited to a party. What would someone who loved themselves do? You'll get the immediate intuitive answer, and you basically have to have the balls to act on it. So that's what you're doing for an entire year, is everything in your life is judged against that criteria. What would someone who loved themselves do? And it's incredible. It'll transform your life entirely. I call it the shortcut, because ultimately you would not actually have to do anything else, and you'd reach enlightenment if you were able to do this all day, every day. But also it shows you how much you don't love yourself, which, let's be honest, a lot of people are in serious denial relative to self-hate. You know, a lot of people say, well, surely self-hatred is too strong a word for the way I feel about myself. I just don't really feel like it's a good thing for me to be focusing energy on myself all the time. And really one of my favorite parts about this book that I wrote is that it throws a wrench in the spokes of that concept by saying that everybody on this earth is really self-hating to some degree. So let's call it what it is. Let's call it self-hatred, and let's work our way out of it. And 365 days of self-love really helps people to see how much they do not base their decisions in their life based on loving themselves. They base their decisions based on all kinds of other things, like things I think I should do or shouldn't do, wanting external approval, and the list goes on and on.
Oh, it's so awesome. I just think it's so awesome because, I mean, self-love and self-worth for me is the core of the issue. And that is how one comes to true happiness. I know that from my own journey, and I'm really excited about your new book. I think that's just, I mean, you're cutting right through everything. I mean, self-love, that's it. And how to do it. People, like you said, people don't know, like, where to begin. How do you begin loving yourself? And your drinking water technique is really neat too, because not only are you putting that energy into your body, but you're showing yourself just by drinking the water that you love yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. I also want to add something. Here's some more universal truth. So you ready for this? The ultimate truth of this universe is that the only thing we're ever learning how to do is love ourselves. That is the only job. If you want to talk about enlightenment, it's not even about loving other people. It's not about awareness. What it is about is learning to love yourself completely, because everything in your reality is nothing but a projection of you. So we when we say, I love all that is, really, it's the same as saying I love myself completely. So if you learn how to quit dealing with the external reality, focus your attention inwards, and love yourself completely, you can do no other than to love every aspect of the rest of this universe. And being in that vibration of total unconditional love is the exact same vibration as enlightenment. Mm-hmm. So self-love, enlightenment, exact same word.
That's awesome. And you just did a video on enlightenment, which I thought was so good. I think the title is something about having a bad day, but It was so good. And can you talk a little bit about enlightenment? Because I think that's misunderstood by so many people, what that actually means.
Oh, hell yeah. Enlightenment is so misused. Oh my goodness. So, and it's really harmful. We have this idea that enlightenment is this kind of blissful retirement from ups and downs, a blissful retirement from life in the way that other people experience it. And that is so not the case. Enlightenment is just reaching a point of awareness where you are capable of vibrating at the same frequency as your eternal aspect, as source energy. So you're vibrating with the same perspective as universal consciousness, but it is still a choice to maintain that vibration or not. So it's not like once you achieve that, some weird cataclysmic event happens and then suddenly you can't think a negative thought ever again. You reach that point, and then all that does is give you the access to get back to that perspective. But it's still in your power whether you're going to focus negatively or positively. And the truth still remains the same, that if you're going to focus negatively, you will manifest negative events and negative experiences. If you focus on something that is in line with universal perspective, you will manifest that. And so even after we achieve what people are calling enlightenment, which is just the awareness of that you get when you vibrate at the same frequency as your eternal aspect, it still is a process of maintaining it day after day, moment in and moment out. So rather than it being that enlightenment changes everything about you, it's that once you gain enlightenment, you have a different way of going about dealing with things. So I was explaining to somebody earlier that if you watch somebody like, let's say somebody that we would say is enlightened, if you watch them, it seems like they're not having the same emotional reaction to anything that the average human does, when that's not the case. The thing is, they can shift their focus so quickly that when they experience the initial reaction to an event, in a period of seconds, they can withdraw that focus and place it on the level of the eternal perspective relative to that very same thing, and thus not experience the same emotional reaction. But that's a deliberate thing that they are doing. So from the outside, it looks as if they're not getting affected by something, when on the inside, they're getting affected, but they're changing the meaning of that thing which they're experiencing so quick that you can't even see it register on the outside.
That's right. It's so cool. It's pure awareness. So instead of having the events controlling you, you are choosing how to respond to the event.
Yes. Exactly.
Awesome.
And so my favorite, actually there's a Buddhist teacher who I think invented my very favorite way of explaining this. And what he says is, after the ecstasy, the laundry, meaning that even those who find enlightenment have to do laundry tomorrow. So I totally love that, because it is exactly true as to how this whole thing works. And most of us, the reason I think it's so incredibly harmful the way that we approach the concept of enlightenment is because we judge ourselves next to this precondition which actually doesn't exist. So we have an idea of what the enlightened being is, and we measure ourselves next to that, and no matter what, we will always fall short. Even enlightened beings would fall short of our expectation of enlightened beings. And when you measure yourself next to that criteria, all you've got is misery. You can't even reach the state where you can learn how to release resistance to things, which is what ultimately causes a state of enlightenment. And so we're damaging ourselves with our own idea that you reach enlightenment and then it's done. And even that implies resistance. So if I feel as if I want this process of life to be done and over with, so that I can kind of retire to a state of perpetual heaven, that is the indication that I have resistance to life itself. And if that still exists, I have not reached that state of enlightenment. I am not maintaining that state of enlightenment. Because the enlightened, if you've reached the state of enlightenment, you have learned to release resistance to such a degree that you don't have resistance to life itself ever. You could keep going. You can embrace the ups and downs completely.
Yeah, enlightenment encompasses everything, and so you're taking into account and everything that's happening. You're not bypassing your feelings, as you said in your video. You're looking at everything, and you're taking it all into account, and then you're choosing how you're responding to it. So enlightenment is also empowerment, self-empowerment, in my understanding, the way I am living my life,
Oh yeah, I don't see any difference between enlightenment and empowerment, because enlightenment, so the minute that you match the frequency of your eternal perspective, it's like opening the floodgates to your eternal perspective, and most often the eternal perspective, source energy, is compared with light. So if you're opening up to the eternal consciousness, you're opening the floodgates to the light of that consciousness, and you could see that as empowerment, enlightenment, same thing.
So how does this figure in with desire? You say things in some of your videos, focus on what you desire. Desire is not bad. Find what's good about this whole desire thing, and how does that figure in with enlightenment? Because I'm sure you don't mean just focus on the next ice cream bar or the next man you want to go to bed with, not the desire of the ego or but you're saying that the entire universe is waiting with bated breath for you to manifest your next desire. And I want to hear more about your perspective on that and how it relates to enlightenment.
Okay, so desire is amazing. Desire is the vibration in this universe which causes expansion. When you desire something, that's what tells the universe what to become. So the universe has projected forth you, which is just a physical extension of itself, in order to ascertain through the contrast of this physical reality what you would prefer. And when you give rise to a preference, the universe becomes the vibration of that preference. And so we call that expansion. You are calling the universe into the new place based on the thoughts that you're thinking that have been inspired from your physical life. Desire is the thing which tells the universe what to become. And so if we try to make an enemy of desire, we're making an enemy of expansion. It is the same thing. You cannot say it's improper to desire and not be saying simultaneously that it's improper to expand. The problem is when we run into desire as this concept of want. Desire and want are two totally different things. Desire you could see as the inspiration towards a preference, absent of the concept that you can't have that thing. Now want is I desire this thing, but I don't have it and might even not think that I can have it. That is what causes serious pain within a human being relative to what they think is desire. It's impossible for a person or a being to not desire something. So even the wild being in the wilderness desires food, and that desire is something which the universe lines up with. So even the desire to be rid of desire is a desire. So we could never get rid of desire if we wanted to, no matter what, because it is the very criteria by which we are sent down here to this physical planet. But once you give rise to a desire, your eternal perspective now stands in a new, improved vibrational set point. And so you must stay a match to that set point if you wish to experience positive emotion and if you wish to exist here long term. There can't be a gap between your vibration and your eternal aspect vibration for very long without you manifesting physical ailments and eventually dying. So the process, the goal of enlightenment, basically, like I said, enlightenment is exactly matching the frequency of your highest perspective, the perspective of source energy. And if source energy moves forward to become the vibration of your desire, then you have no option but to keep up if you want to maintain enlightenment. You have no option but to keep up if you want to experience a good life. And so there's nothing wrong. See, and the universe would say there's nothing wrong even with ego's desires, because even if ego has a desire like, I want to be a millionaire, okay, it's fine to want that. So go line up with being a millionaire. And then when you are a millionaire, because you've lined up with that vibration, you will be standing at a new platform from which to desire more. And maybe once you become a millionaire, you find out that that's not all there is to life, and then suddenly you desire something else, like human connection. And so the source could not make an enemy even of ego's desire of being a millionaire, because being a millionaire is what's going to enable the inevitable conclusion, which is a person lining up with who they truly are, with the desire to become whole again. So even our egoic desires are causing expansion within this universe. It just works much quicker and much better for us if we can ascertain what our true desires are. Look into why we would really want to be a millionaire. What is it really that's doing for us? And to focus on those aspects, because that's our true desire, more so than the egoic aspects. But the universe is much smarter than we give it credit for, because it knows better than you do what you want. So even when a person says, I want to kill someone, the universe can see that what is truly wanted is the feeling of empowerment, which a person does not have. When a person is standing in a point of powerlessness, their desire to kill somebody is just their desire to feel as if they have some control of their own reality. And so the next knee-jerk reaction is to kill someone, from that set point, basically, of powerlessness. But the universe knows that the true desire is not to kill someone. The true desire is to feel as if you have control, to feel as if you have control of your reality, to feel some sense of empowerment. So the universe is not dumb enough to think that we desire these negative things, which most people are afraid of. When I say follow your desire, most people say, well, but what about I want to drink? What about I want to shoot up heroin? What about I want to kill people? And that this is just coming from the misunderstanding that that desire is just the knee-jerk reaction to feeling powerless. And that is the first step, potentially, on a long train of desires, ultimately leading up to the desire to find unity, not only with oneself, but with the rest of the universe.
Always doing what feels right, because that's going to lead you to the next step.
Exactly, but we've made it very hard in this society because we're too damn scared of what will happen if we give people permission to get what they want. Because we are all convinced of this reality which exists separate from us, and so if we are convinced of a reality that exists separate from us, then suddenly someone can impose themselves on our reality, which is never the case, but it's what we think. And so if we can round everyone up and get them to agree and impose laws that make them behave in a certain way, then suddenly everyone will behave in a way that makes us feel good. And this is really the hard way of going about things. Because no matter what you do, if you're in that aspect of resistance, number one, you can't manifest it, but number two, could you really round up every single being on this planet and get them all to reach a consensus which made everybody happy? No, because the number one basis of this universe is free will. And it's not the way that the universe works. It works like this. You find out what you want individually. You line up with what you want, and the universe must reflect that exactly. There can be no exceptions to this rule. So and this is where it gets hard for people to accept. If multiple people experience an earthquake, it's because each individual person has become a match to that earthquake. It's not because the earthquake is being done to them. So our only desire to control other people comes from the belief that we have no control ultimately over a reality which exists outside of us. But this is one of the most damaging perpetual illusions that we have bought into as a human race.
Wow.
Would you say that dysfunction comes from not being in alignment with who you truly are, and how does one get into alignment with their eternal essence?
100%. All pain on this planet is caused by being out of alignment with your own source perspective, which is why ultimately I chose the business of spirituality, not because of some booming god in the sky, but because of the fact that you are not a human body. This is just what you are projected as in this moment. You are an eternal being. And the minute that you line up with that eternal being and you start living outside the box more in line with your joy, then your life starts going really, really good for you. So our pain, of course, happens from being out of alignment. But we must be willing to deliberately look for thoughts, to take our teeth out of the idea of an external truth long enough that we can start looking for things to focus on that actually feel emotionally good to us. And that takes some serious balls. I'm not going to lie. The people who follow my teachings, I have the utmost respect for them because I know exactly, personally, how damn hard it is to pull your teeth out of a reality everyone else wants you to accept. Because the minute that you start focusing on what makes you feel good individually, you get a whole lot of crap from other people who wish they could do that but don't feel capable of doing that. And they would rather you come back into alignment with what they believe to reinforce their beliefs, to validate their own thinking, and stop behaving in that outside-the-box way. But this is what it's going to take for all of us to enlighten as a species and as individuals. We need to find the next best thought from wherever we are, which in and of itself presents a problem because when you're in a space of powerlessness, the next best thought, which is the only thought you actually have access to, you don't have access to positive thoughts. The only thought you have access to from a space of powerlessness is a thought like anger. And because we're so damn afraid as a species and as a society to allow people to express anger, to allow people to come into that emotion, we're keeping them in a state of powerlessness, and we're keeping them vibrating at this very low point until eventually that energy has to go somewhere, and it comes out in some sort of an action like a murder or a fight, or you fill in the blank. And so we need to be willing individually to allow ourselves to think of anything that causes us to feel an emotional sensation of relief, and to continue doing that and continue doing that and moving up the scale basically until we find those thoughts which feel positive. And we need to train ourselves to take action that is in alignment with inspiration. So you want to take inspired action rather than an urge. So you may get an urge from a negative emotional space to take drugs, say. But if you trace back what emotion that urge came from, it was a negative emotional space. It was a negative thought which inspired that urge. That's your indication that you're only going to line up with something negative. But if you're able to keep thinking thoughts that pull you further and further into better feeling states, eventually you will feel an inspiration to take action. That is the only action you should be taking. Is an inspiration which is based on a positive emotion, a positive thought, because that's the only thing that's going to line up with a positive result. And if we can teach ourselves to do this, then we can stay in a pattern of alignment and stay in line with enlightenment and even achieve that awareness, which we call enlightenment, much quicker. And you'll see the entirety of humanity change as a result of people doing that on an individual basis, which is why I'm teaching people individually. Is because the more of us that do this, the easier it is for society to change, because we like to jade ourselves and say, oh, this society is so out of control, but we miss the fact that society is nothing but a collection of its smallest units, which is one person. So if one person is able to find this kind of alignment, and one person is able to find this kind of alignment, and one person is able to find this kind of alignment, suddenly we have 3 people that have found alignment. So imagine if we could all do this. Imagine what human society would look like.
Absolutely. That's what we're envisioning. And so what I love also about your message is that you don't just overjump the shadow into positive thinking, that feelings and emotions are a very big part of bringing that into integration so that you can truly have clear, happy thoughts. But it's not just happy thoughts just to think bliss, bliss bunnies, I guess some people call that, where you're just overjumping the shadow. And your work really encompasses bringing that aspect into an alignment, into integration, I suppose is the better word to use there. So it's not just about thinking positive thoughts. There's a whole nother aspect to this.
Oh, exactly. That's total shadow work stuff right there. I'm a very, very big supporter of shadow work. Because no matter how much you try, see, the thing is that your brain is an efficiency device. Which means that it's so kind and generous that if you think a thought enough times, it goes, okay, I'll take care of that so you no longer have to think that thought so you can go on to focus on bigger and better things. So now our brain forms neural pathways that are in charge of communicating specific thoughts to our body so that we no longer have to consciously think those thoughts into reality for ourselves. So it's the same as I like to explain this with the analogy of the swimmer. In the beginning, it's really hard to figure out how to do a but by the time you talk to someone like Michael Phelps, he doesn't know how to do a backstroke because his brain knows how to do the backstroke. It has taken charge of that thought to such a degree that it is now a subconscious or unconscious thing. So we're doing this on all kinds of levels, physical and non-physical. And so when you think a negative thought enough times that it becomes part of your unconscious wired programming in your brain, then you can think that thought 800 times in the period that it takes you to think a positive thought. I mean, it can fire off and fire off and fire off, and suddenly you've got this huge vibrational dissonance here where you've got the negative belief which has existed for so long, which is rapid firing, which is pulling against the one positive thought you're trying to replace it with. So unless you go turn the opposite direction, shine that light in towards the unconscious belief so that it can become part of your consciousness, so it can reintegrate into consciousness, then there's no way that you can pacify and let go of that vibration enough for it to be replaced. Because, so if you're just focusing on positive, if you were capable, let's just pretend, if you were capable of only focusing on positive things all day, every day, then yeah, it would work 100%. You could do that and you could manifest a fabulous life. I just don't know a single person who can do that. I don't know a single person whose brain isn't streamlined enough that it can think a negative thought 8 times in the time period that it takes a person to focus on one affirmation. And so it's super important to go back and forth between focusing positively, and then when you run into something where you really can't focus positively towards it without glossing over, that's your indication that it's time to flip around the other direction, pull that anchor out of the sand, or shine light in the shadow, whichever way you want to look at it. And then you can purify those vibrations, at which point it will be 10 times easier to focus on the positive thing and actually believe it, instead of just be sugarcoating the thing.
It's so incredible because we're so focused on the whistleblower concept of revealing the Illuminati in the outer world. And from what I understand of your work, what you're showing is that we have so internalized that the real genius of the dark side is that they have gotten each one of us to incorporate this internal shadow aspect, which some call the superego, this condemner, this punisher, this torturer, this one that says our desire is bad, that we don't deserve love, that we don't deserve happiness, that our bodies are evil, that all the things that would rev the juice enough to keep lifting our frequency into our sovereignty and our freedom are all condemned. And we can be out on the streets, and I'm not condemning that because I know that's a part of the action. And we can say, enough with you, while these voices are triggering and these patterns are triggering. They've been conditioned from all of the abuse and the trauma, of all of the conditioning, of all of the mind control. So this is why your work is so valuable to us, and the wisdom to recognize that the Illuminati is living in us as us. And this is the only place, and a super powerful place, where we can create shift.
It is so incredibly true. And my favorite part about this is when people, hear, this is what I'm actually the most famous for, is shadow work. Obviously, given my childhood, I've done tons and tons of it, and I enjoy it quite a bit. But people look at me and say, whoa, you're a shadow worker. That's some really intense stuff. And I always kind of laugh because when we're talking about shadow work, we're all thinking that we're dealing with monsters, but what we're actually working with is small children who are fearing monsters, not the monsters themselves. And when you go really close, that's all you find. You just find the most frightened, tiniest little child aspects of yourself. That's all the shadow work really ends up being. They may project monsters, but it never really is monsters.
That's so true. That's such a great way of saying it. I mean, I have this vision of going, like, shadow work is kind of like a forest, a dark, scary forest. But then what you find there is exactly what you said. This child sitting behind a tree, crying. Like, you get it, bringing those pieces back. And it's it's just so rewarding. And every time you do it, the forest isn't as scary anymore, Shadowland, whatever you want to call it. Because going in there what you're going to get, what you're going to find. And it's worth it to go in and retrieve those parts of ourselves.
Oh, yeah, worth it is a bit of an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult to express to somebody who's right on the forefront of going there because it is so damn scary, but to say that it's worth it is definitely an understatement. It is the key to everything. The amount of freedom and the amount of joy you can experience after integrating your shadow aspects is unparalleled.
Absolutely.
There is no kind of life as a life that is lived without fear.
I think
How do you work with your inner child around these aspects? You work on a daily basis with the inner child, or of course the inner child grows up at some stage.
Ooh, that's actually one of my teachings, is that the inner child never grows up.
Okay.
I talk a lot about the fact that the inner child never grows up. It is actually incapable of growing up. We just get better at parenting it. And so I work with the inner child all the time. But not on a daily basis. I never set it out in a way that I'll go deal with it at this specific time. I allow it to come up. So anytime I have any kind of negative emotion, I will go check in with inner children and see if there's one that wants to, symbolically pop up and talk about something that needs to be healed. But I think it's one of the most valuable ways of going about things. So we can work with the inner child. We can also use inquiry. Any kind of questioning is working in the shadows. We can, of course, chase our core beliefs, and we can find our disowned selves. There's a million different ways that you can go about doing this kind of shadow aspect work.
Absolutely. So I want to hear, you make some bold statements, beautiful one, about that the universe is waiting for our next creation to expand. Desire is causing the expansion of the universe. Can you speak to that? I know you have to some extent, but it's a very radical concept for most of us.
Well, like I said before, I want you to think about the universe like a blank canvas. And all that is on this canvas is what is being projected forth from right now. So the only future which actually exists for us, the only future that, say, a psychic could read, is the projection of the vibration that currently is. So law of attraction, right, states the only vibrations which can share space are vibrations which match. So vibrationally, the future must match the current vibration which exists, which is why you could say that changing anything about your vibration now changes the future, because it's an absolute. But so if you think of a blank canvas as the future, there is nothing that's written other than what we have projected that's a match to the current reality. If you give rise to a new desire and the universe becomes that vibration, suddenly the picture of our future has changed. And this happens every time we desire something. So like I said earlier, you want $1 million. So now you get $1 million. Let's say you manage to line up vibrationally with that. Now you're standing in a new place and there's a new set of contrast. So maybe now that you're a millionaire, you don't have friends, and then maybe you want friends. So now I want to be a millionaire plus friends. And when you get to that place, that's a new perspective. So each time we line up with a new desire, that is a brand new perspective. And the universe is self-actualizing through perspectives. It is becoming more, expanding through perspectives. So the more perspectives you can give rise to, the more expansion within the universe. And desire, lining up with desire, is what causes those new perspectives. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yes. Well.
To me, it does. It's that for me, I understand it as the universe rearranges itself to accommodate your picture or your awareness of reality in any given moment. And so, yes, I feel that the future is in flux. It's a dynamic based on where you are. And so, again, that's why it's so important to do the shadow work, because you're constantly creating from the place that you are. So if you're doing the shadow work and you're clearing that stuff away, integrating all that, becoming more in line with who you truly are, and expressing from that place, I mean, wow. The future it's just going to be so much more in alignment, in harmony with life, and joyful and exciting.
Well, that's really good. So here's another thing. So we understand that Hitler, right, is out of alignment. Obviously, look at the kind of reality he created for himself. He was out of alignment at the time when he was creating his regime. But when the universe, from the universal perspective, looks at the person who has created the most peace on this planet, Hitler is the answer. Not by virtue of him lining up with his own creation of peace, but by virtue of what he inspired within people. So many people worldwide during that particular war were inspired towards peace, that now, even as a species, we have lined up with that to such an extreme degree, much more so than we had lined up with up to that point. And so now we as a human race are standing in a new perspective just based on that one experience. So we're doing this not only as individuals, but also as a collective human consciousness, as collective consciousness of the earth itself, and there are all these different levels which consciousness exists at. And each time that consciousness moves into a new perspective by virtue of desiring something new, the universe expands to encapsulate that vibration.
So when we're done needing Hitler...
Which is very soon. See, you have gotten to a place, most people who will be listening to a show like this have already gotten themselves to a place where they don't need it anymore. Why don't you need it anymore? Because you have already given rise to what you would prefer. So the whole key for people who are in that state is to line up with it, which most people don't do. And activists are the number one best at not doing this, is that most activists, even though they have given rise to what they would prefer, and the universe has become that level of peace which they have given rise to, they still stand and focus on what they don't want. We're still anti-war. So we're still focused on the problem, and each time we're focused on the problem, our desire for peace gets bigger, and so the universal perspective of peace gets better, but we never get to align with and experience that level of peace because we are not allowing ourselves to move in the direction of peace. We're too focused on resisting war.
Wow.
So how do we cut down this super ego voice? How do we recognize it, minimize it, because it's still all of this mind control that we don't even know we have?
I think it's just you got to work with your fears. You got to do enough inquiry, basically, that every time you have a reaction to anything, you fully question the entire reaction that you're having. I think one of the best ways to go about this is doing the core belief processes, which I've come up with. You basically, once you start off with a reaction to something, you alternate what would that mean to me and why would that be so bad, so that you can get to the actual core problem underneath all of that. And then you can start working on replacing that particular belief. And once you replace that belief, obviously your life is going to reflect different things to you. But until we're, I guess, able to differentiate our fear from everything else, then we can't really utilize our intuition. And we can't really go in the right direction for ourselves, because we've got all this reasoning which is convincing us that we need to still be in a state of resistance, and that's what's going to mean safety. Worry is one of the best examples for this, because anyone who worries is basically convinced that there's an external reality, and that preparing for the worst is what's going to make it so that you're not blindsided, so it's at least some level of control. But if we question that and question and question it, we get down to the fact that we're damn scared that we don't create our own reality. So then we can start working on the real belief, which is that belief. And once that's, pacified, there's no need to worry anymore, because you've gotten rid of the reason why you were doing it in the first place.
And people often say, how do I know the voice of my intuition? How would you describe that?
I would say you do not know the voice of your intuition until you have gotten rid of most of your fear, if not all of your fear. If you have strong emotional reactions, that's your indication that it is not your intuition. Because here's the thing, when we are talking about intuition, so you have your internal guidance system, right? Your guidance system is your emotions. That is an extreme connection, so I could call that your sixth sense. But when we're talking about intuition, so I just know this person's going to die, right? That information is going to be shared to you in a non-emotional way, because emotions are restricted to the third dimension. They are an actual biochemical reaction. So obviously, when there's information coming from multiple different dimensional realities, there is no physical body, and so there will be no emotional emphasis on that. So you could get the intuition, and then all of your extreme emotion is because you've already added thoughts on top of that emotion. So the best way to ascertain your own emotions versus intuition is to learn to recognize the totally I would call it a non-announced voice, which is the innate knowing, which is absent of serious attachment to the knowing. Because emotion is attachment to the knowing. Emotion happens when we say, when you get the intuition, I know that person's going to die, and then you say, oh my gosh, what would that mean for me? And suddenly you go down that spiral. That's when the emotion starts to happen. So unless we're willing to work with our emotions and work with our fears enough, we can never really recognize that tiny voice, because intuition is really like that. It is it doesn't compete like the ego does. The ego, which is concerned with survival, competes for you to listen to it. And so it's super, super loud, whereas the intuition doesn't feel that need. And so it's not super, super loud. It's very, very quiet. And until we silence our ego minds, basically, there's no way to hear that voice.
Yeah, it's a very graceful, it's a quiet voice, but sometimes it can have a strength to it. I wouldn't necessarily call it an urgency, because the intuition doesn't really speak in that sort of, like you said, emotion. But I think defining the difference for people is really important, so they can start to tune into that quiet, gentle voice.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. We get to be happy. It does seem to me that most of us are allergic to being happy. And look what we do when we see lovers. Look what we do, many of us. I know I've been guilty. When you see someone's happy, and the unhappy part of you just like goes, like the Wicked Witch of the West. There is so little real human happiness. We have so little access to this from all of this super egoic mind programming that we've bought into and accepted as our God, our Savior. Lord, happiness. So are you happy now, Teal?
I would say yes, but I would also say that it's not that I don't ever struggle at all. It's that my happiness comes from the fact that I'm able to milk my joyful experiences, and more than that, I'm able to change the meaning of the difficulties which I face, which is the real key to happiness. Because happiness is easy when we're focused at something we love, but it's not easy when you're focused at something that you've manifested that's not so fabulous to look at. So your happiness is all about learning to switch around your focus towards the negative things which you experience, how to pivot it, how to change the meaning. So if I am able to look at this negative experience in terms of how it benefits me rather than how it hurts me, then it's no longer going to manifest itself with that same sensation of pain. You're not going to get the same suffering relative to the experience when you change the meaning that it has for you, which is why questioning your thoughts, of course, is the most important thing you can do, I think, here on planet Earth.
That's the key right there. That's what I do. When I have a situation that's difficult, is I flip it and I look at it and go, okay, what can I gain from this? What is this trying to show me? What can I learn? How is this challenge going to benefit my growth? And as soon as I do that, it's like it no longer has the power to, I mean, sure, it's still difficult. It might be painful even, but it doesn't have the power over me to make me feel truly like deeply unhappy. In fact, I'm actually like, okay, it's like a challenge. I'm like, okay, here we go. What can I do with this? You know? So that really is the key, at least for me as well.
Oh, it's completely the key. And when you're doing that, you're looking at the reality that you're living in through Source's eyes. So that is the same as aligning with enlightened perspective. Because the way the universe sees everything, including Hitler, is that it is something of value to the planet. Whether the value is the thing that person taught or byproduct, the thing which they inspired through people by virtue of their disconnection. It is still causing the expansion of the universe. It is still causing you to become more, which is why I think it's so incredibly important for me to be in the public eye right now, is because, living the childhood that I lived, now I'm in a point in my life where I can tell you the kind of value that an experience like that had, because we really suffer as a species when we look at people like myself and say that should never have happened. And would I wish it to happen to somebody else? No, I would never wish it to happen to somebody else, but we cannot reject it, resist it, or condemn something like I went through and be happy at the same time as a species because of the amount of value that can come out of an experience like I had. So if I can switch the meaning of something like I went through, then I can inspire people to do the same relative to their own lives and find that kind of expansion within the universe as a byproduct of that. We can find joy if we're able to switch the way that we look at anything.
Thank you so much for sharing your work and speaking publicly with your story, your wisdom, everything you've gained on your journey. And you truly are a way shower. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope it helps some people.
Well, I think that it absolutely has to, because it is a truth that so few get to, and that you took the maximum ride to find it for us all. And this kind of truth resonates, to be sure.
Good. That was the purpose for coming down here and doing it in the first place. I guess that's the benefit, though, of being able to access your life before you came in. I now remember even choosing the potential of this particular experience that I had. It wasn't a for sure thing before I came in, but I stayed a match to it for this very reason. There was a lot of collective asking in terms of, wanting to be able to look at something and utilize that as a way of believing that you can get past anything. Because human beings still hold on to the belief that there are still some things which you can't come back from. But this does not serve us. Beliefs like this doesn't serve us as individuals, and it sure as hell does not survive or benefit us as a race. So the faster we can get rid of that belief, the better. And if I can help to do that, then hell yes.
You are absolutely helping to do that. And what an incredible bodhisattva mission for all of us. And I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart that you have done this, that you are doing this. Can we please get all of your information one last time? There's so much information on your videos, on your website, in your books. Just on the tip of the iceberg here. I encourage everybody, go to your website and really dive into this. So give us your website again and your book.
Okay, the website is www.thespiritualcatalyst.com. My YouTube channel is the spiritual catalyst. My series is called Ask Teal. And my book that's available for purchase is The Sculptor in the Sky, and soon to be publishing How to Love Yourself.
Well, thank you again so much. You've given me breakthrough moments. I have been actually in epiphanies of transformation in the last 2 days studying your material, and I've been doing shadow work for a very long time. You're bringing in something truly groundbreaking out of living it at the depth and bringing it to us at the heights. And I can't thank you enough, Teal. Much, much love to you, and great wishes to bring your message to the world, and in the process experience great happiness.
Thank you, Teal.
Thank you for sharing yourself with us, Teal. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Join us again next week on Shadowland Voyagers.
Good night.